You know those moments when life feels simple, routine, and secure? That was me, or at least what I thought my life was. I'm Jake, 35 years old, married for 8 years to the woman I thought I'd spend forever with, Lila. She's the kind of person who lights up a room when she walks in, a social butterfly with a smile that could disarm you instantly. People would always tell me how lucky I was, and I believed it too. But I guess luck has its expiration date. This all started last Friday when I returned home early from a business trip. I work in tech, dull, I know, but the work pays well, and it's allowed us to build a comfortable life. Lila, meanwhile, quit her job at a marketing firm 2 years ago to rediscover herself. I didn't mind. She was a great homemaker, always keeping our home spotless, planning vacations, and making our lives look like a curated Instagram reel. The trip I was on was supposed to last until Sunday, but a client meeting got canceled, and I figured surprising my wife would be the perfect way to kick off the weekend. On my way back, I stopped at a small boutique to grab something thoughtful, a vintage bracelet she'd once admired during a trip to Charleston. It wasn't anything extravagant, but I knew she'd love it. I imagined her throwing her arms around me, her laugh echoing through the house as she scolded me for spoiling her again. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was parked in its usual spot. Everything looked normal. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of vanilla candles greeting me. I called out, "Lila? I'm home." My voice echoed through the house and I chuckled, wondering if she was upstairs or in the backyard. Then I saw them. A pair of men's sneakers. Large, mud-caked sneakers, sitting neatly next to the door. My first thought was innocent enough. Maybe they belonged to a contractor or someone she called over for repairs. But then I remembered, I handled all the maintenance around the house. She hated dealing with contractors. That's when the first flicker of unease crept into my chest. I set the gift bag on the counter and moved further inside. The house was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet you enjoy after a long day, but the kind that wraps around you like a cold, damp fog. "Lila?" I called again, this time louder. I heard something, a shuffle upstairs. My heart started pounding as I climbed the stairs 2 at a time. The noise led me to our bedroom, the door ajar. I reached out, pushing it open with a hand that suddenly felt too heavy. And there they were. Lila was in bed, her body half covered by the sheets, and she wasn't alone. There was a man with her, lean, dark-haired, and grinning like he owned the place. A knot formed in my throat as my brain tried to process the scene. My wife, my Lila, was in bed with someone else. Her bare shoulders glistened with sweat. The air felt suffocating. Lila turned her head, and for a split second, she froze. But then, in true Lila fashion, she played it off. "Jake," she said, her voice feigning surprise, as if I were the one who had done something wrong. The man, meanwhile, scrambled for his clothes like a cockroach scurrying from the light. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My vision tunneled, and all I could hear was my heartbeat thudding in my ears. Lila stood, pulling on a robe and stepping in front of me like she thought her presence would defuse the bomb she just detonated. "This isn't what it looks like," she began, her tone annoyingly calm. "Not what it looks like." "Really?" She didn't even flinch when I glanced at the guy behind her, who was yanking his jeans on and mumbling something about how he didn't sign up for this. Lila snapped at him to wait in the hallway. "Let me handle this," she said, as if I were some unruly client she needed to pacify. "Who is he?" I finally managed, my voice coming out low and uneven. She sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "It's Andy," she admitted, as if his name would explain everything. "You remember Andy, don't you? We went to high school together." "Andy." Yeah, I remembered him. A smug, overconfident ass who peaked in his junior year as the quarterback. The same Andy who tried to hit on Lila at our 10-year reunion. "Unbelievable," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Lila didn't apologize. Instead, she launched into what I can only describe as a rehearsed speech. "Look, Jake, I know this looks bad, but you have to understand. I've been feeling so alone lately. You're always working, always distracted. And Andy, he's just been there for me. There for her? Like hell." I don't remember much of what happened right after Lila, dropped her pathetic excuse of a justification. Her words blurred together, each one more ridiculous than the last. "You've been distant, Jake. Andy and I just connected. It wasn't supposed to be like this." Every line hit me like a gut punch, but what stood out most was her complete lack of remorse. Andy had slunk out of the room like the coward he was, muttering a half-hearted, "Sorry, man," on his way down the stairs. I didn't follow him, not yet. My focus was on Lila, who stood in front of me with her arms crossed, as if she were annoyed that I had interrupted her little rendezvous. "You're unbelievable," I finally said, my voice low but steady. "You don't even look sorry. Do you even care what you've just done?" Lila scoffed, her lips curling into a smirk. "Oh, come on, Jake. Don't act like some saint. You're always on the road, always buried in work. You don't even look at me the way you used to. What did you expect? For me to sit here and wait for scraps of your attention?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't just lying. She was rewriting history, painting herself as the victim in a story where she was clearly the villain. My hands clenched into fists at my sides as I tried to keep my temper in check. Exploding wouldn't solve anything, and honestly, she wasn't worth the satisfaction. "I've been working my ass off to give you this life," I said, gesturing around the room. "The house, the trips, the dinners, everything. And this is how you repay me? By screwing Andy the quarterback?" She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic, Jake. It's not like I planned for this to happen. It just did. And for the record, he treats me like a person, not some obligation you tick off your list between meetings." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, so you're the victim here? That's rich. You know what, Lila? Save the excuses. I don't care why you did it. What I want to know is how long this has been going on." She hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. That tiny pause told me everything I needed to know. "A few months," she finally admitted, her tone defensive. "But it doesn't change the fact that—" "Months?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You've been sleeping with him for months, and you've been coming home to me like nothing's wrong? Like you're not betraying me every single day?" Lila flinched at the word betraying, but she quickly masked it with more indignation. "Don't act like you're blameless, Jake. You've been so checked out of this marriage, I might as well have been invisible. Andy actually listens to me. He makes me feel wanted." "Wanted?" I snapped, my patience finally snapping. "You're wanted, Lila, by your husband, the man who's been breaking his back to give you everything. But clearly that wasn't enough for you." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned away, her hands fidgeting with the belt of her robe. It was the first sign of unease I'd seen from her, and for a moment, I thought she might apologize. But then she turned back to me, her face set in a hard, defiant expression. "If you're so unhappy, Jake," she said coolly, "then maybe this marriage isn't worth saving." Her words hit me like a slap. I had come home expecting to surprise my wife with a thoughtful gift, only to find her in bed with another man. And now, she had the audacity to suggest that our marriage, our life together, was disposable? I took a step back, the weight of her betrayal crashing down on me. "You're right," I said, my voice calm but laced with cold resolve. "It's not worth saving." Her eyes widened, just slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to agree. But I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Instead, I turned and walked out of the bedroom, ignoring her protests as she followed me down the stairs. "Jake, wait. We need to talk about this." I stopped at the door, turning to face her one last time. "There's nothing left to talk about, Lila. You made your choice. Now you can live with it." And with that, I walked out the door, leaving her standing there in her robe, her face pale with the realization that her safety net had just snapped. I didn't know where I was going, but one thing was clear. I wasn't coming back. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the anger pulsing in my chest like a living thing. I tried to keep my mind focused on the road, but my thoughts kept circling back to Lila's face, her lies, and that smug bastard Andy. Her audacity was one thing, but the lack of remorse? That was a whole other level of betrayal. I trusted her. I'd built a life with her. Eventually, I pulled into a motel off the highway. It wasn't much, Just a worn-down room with beige walls and a sagging mattress, but it was quiet, and that's all I wanted. I threw my phone on the bedside table and stared at it like it was a grenade. I didn't want to deal with the flood of calls and texts I knew were coming, but when I finally picked it up, I was surprised to find only one message from Lila. "Jake, we need to talk. Please come back so we can figure this out." Figure this out? Like we'd lost the remote and were brainstorming where to look? My thumb hovered over the delete button, but instead, I turned the phone off and let it clatter back onto the table. Talking wasn't going to fix this, not when she'd already decided I wasn't worth her loyalty. The next morning, I called my friend Marcus. He's one of the few people I trust, someone who's been in my corner since college. Marcus is the kind of guy who tells it like it is, no sugarcoating, and I needed that now more than ever. "Jake? What's up, man? Thought you were on a trip," Marcus said when he picked up. I replied, my voice strained. "Got back early. Found Lila in bed with Andy Prescott." Marcus was silent for a moment. "Are you serious?" he finally said, his tone sharp. "That prick? The one from high school?" "Yeah," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "Apparently, they've been seeing each other for months." "Jesus, Jake. I'm sorry, man. What are you gonna do?" "I'm filing for divorce," I said, the words coming out steadier than I felt. "I'm not giving her a chance to worm her way out of this." Marcus let out a low whistle. "Good. You deserve better than her, Jake. You need a plan, though. Have you talked to a lawyer?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But that's my next step." "Let me know if you need recommendations," Marcus said. "And Jake, don't let her make you feel like this is your fault. Cheating isn't a mistake. It's a choice." His words stuck with me long after we hung up. Marcus was right. Lila's actions were deliberate. She'd crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. I spent the rest of the day making calls. I found a lawyer, Victoria Mills, a no-nonsense woman who came highly recommended. When I explained my situation, she didn't sugarcoat things. "Infidelity cases can get messy," Victoria said during our consultation. "Do you have any proof of the affair?" "I walked in on them," I said. "Does that count?" "It helps," she replied, her tone professional. "But if you want to ensure a smooth process, get everything in writing. Texts, emails, anything that shows she's been unfaithful." I thanked her and promised to follow up with whatever evidence I could find. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in. This wasn't just an emotional betrayal. It was a logistical nightmare, one that would take months, if not longer, to untangle. That night, back in the motel room, I opened a bottle of whiskey I'd picked up at a gas station. The burn of the alcohol dulled the edges of my anger, but it didn't silence the thoughts running through my head. Memories of happier times with Lila, our wedding day, vacations, lazy Sunday mornings, kept flashing in my mind, now tainted by her betrayal. I tried to push them away, focusing instead on what I needed to do next. Tomorrow, I'd go home, not to talk to Lila, but to collect my things. I'd let her keep the house for now. It was just bricks and drywall. I'd start fresh somewhere else, somewhere her shadow couldn't reach me. I poured another glass, raising it in a mock toast to the empty room. "Here's to moving on," I muttered. The words felt hollow, but I'd make them real. I had to. I went back to the house the next morning, steeling myself for whatever nonsense Lila was going to throw at me. I didn't give her any warning. Why should I? It wasn't her house anymore. It was a monument to what she'd destroyed. The driveway was empty when I pulled up. I hoped it meant Lila was out, giving me the chance to pack my things without a confrontation. I stepped inside and was immediately hit by the familiar scent of her vanilla candles. It wasn't comforting anymore. It was suffocating. The living room was spotless, the way she always kept it, but it felt staged, like some kind of museum exhibit. On the coffee table sat the gift bag I'd brought home 2 days ago, untouched. That stung more than I wanted to admit. She hadn't even bothered to look inside. I headed upstairs to the bedroom. My stomach tightened as I opened the door, half expecting to find another pair of muddy sneakers or worse. But the room was empty. The bed was made, the air thick with the artificial calm of lavender spray. I grabbed a suitcase from the closet and started throwing in clothes, keeping my movements quick and efficient. I didn't want to linger. Every second in that room felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Then I saw it. Her phone, sitting on the nightstand, unlocked. The screen was glowing with a string of texts from someone labeled Andy. My chest tightened as I picked it up, scrolling through the messages. They weren't just incriminating. They were disgusting. Andy, can't wait to see you tonight. I'll bring the wine. Lila, looking forward to it. Jake's out of the picture now, so we can finally relax. Andy, about time. He never deserved you anyway. I read and reread the messages until my hands shook. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the callousness. The way they talked about me like I was some obstacle they'd conquered. I snapped a picture of the conversation with my own phone. Evidence, just like Victoria had advised. Then I dropped her phone back onto the nightstand like it burned. I didn't care if she knew I'd seen it. Let her stew over that. As I zipped up the suitcase, I heard the front door open. My stomach dropped. Perfect. Just what I needed. Another round with Lila. Jake, she called out, her voice cautious. Are you here? I walked out of the bedroom, suitcase in hand, and met her at the base of the stairs. She froze when she saw me, her eyes flicking to the bag in my hand. She was dressed casually, her hair tied back like she'd just come from a yoga class. As if nothing had happened. What are you doing? She asked, her tone more accusatory than concerned. What does it look like? I said, my voice cold. I'm getting my stuff and leaving. You won't have to worry about me ignoring you anymore. She sighed, like I was the one being unreasonable. Jake, can we just sit down and talk? This doesn't have to be so dramatic. Dramatic? I laughed bitterly. You've been sleeping with Andy for months, lying to my face, and I'm the dramatic one? She crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. I told you why it happened. You were never here, Jake. You've been so busy with work, I felt like I didn't even exist. Save it, Lila. I snapped. You're not the victim here. And don't think I don't know about your little plans with Andy. I saw the texts. Her face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly, her lips pressing into a thin line. So what now? You're just going to leave? Throw away 8 years of marriage because of one mistake. One mistake? I repeated, incredulous. This wasn't a mistake, Lila. A mistake is spilling coffee on someone. What you did was deliberate. You didn't just break our marriage, you torched it. She didn't respond. Instead, she looked away, her expression unreadable. Maybe she thought silence would make me reconsider, but it only solidified my resolve. I'll have my lawyer contact you, I said, moving past her toward the door. Enjoy your life with Andy. I'm sure you two deserve each other. I didn't wait for her reply. I walked out, my suitcase rolling behind me, and didn't look back. As I climbed into the car and drove away, a strange sense of relief washed over me. The house, the memories, Lila. They were all in the rearview mirror now. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The drive back to the motel felt lighter, as if each mile I put between myself and that house peeled away another layer of the weight on my chest. But relief doesn't mean resolution, and the storm was still brewing. I had no doubt Lila would try to spin this in her favor. That's what she did. Manipulate situations, twist facts, and somehow emerge looking like the wounded party. When I got back to my room, I texted Victoria, my lawyer. Me, got more evidence today. Found texts on her phone that prove everything. We'll send over tonight. Her reply came almost immediately. Victoria, good. The more we have, the better. I'll prep the paperwork for the divorce. Let me know if she tries to contact you. Try? She wouldn't just try. She'd keep coming until she thought she could reel me back in. That was Lila's MO. But this time, I wasn't biting. I forwarded the screenshots of her messages with Andy to Victoria, making sure she had everything she needed. After that, I threw myself into busy work. Sorting through emails, researching apartments, and checking on my work schedule. Anything to keep my mind from circling back to the past 48 hours. But avoiding the inevitable can only work for so long. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. Hello? I answered, my tone cautious. It's Andy, the voice on the other end said, smug and self-assured. We need to talk. I sat up straighter, my hand tightening around the phone. Do we? Look, man, he continued, his tone dripping with fake empathy. I know things got messy, but this isn't personal. Lila and I. Stop, I cut him off. Don't you dare try to justify this. He had the audacity to laugh. Jake, come on. You and I both know that marriage was dead long before I came into the picture. You weren't giving her what she needed. I just filled in the gaps. I didn't even realize I'd stood up until I felt the cord of the phone charger pull tight against my hand. My knuckles were white as I gripped the phone. My teeth clenched so hard I thought they'd crack. Listen to me, Andy, I said, my voice low and steady. Whatever version of the story she's fed you is bullshit. You think you're the hero, swooping in to rescue her from a bad marriage? You're not. You're just the latest guy who was stupid enough to fall for her lies. That seemed to throw him off, but only for a second. Look, I didn't call the fight. I just wanted to clear the air. Lila's moving on, and I think it'd be best if you did the same. Are you trying to give me advice? I asked, the disbelief in my voice giving way to a cold laugh. That's rich, coming from the guy who had to wait for his turn. Andy's bravado faltered. You know what? Screw you, Jake. You didn't appreciate what you had. That's on you. He hung up before I could reply, leaving me staring at the phone in stunned silence. The nerve of that guy, calling me to play therapist, acting like he was the victim. It was almost laughable. Almost. The call left me buzzing with energy, too keyed up to sit still. I threw on my jacket and stepped out into the cool night air, pacing the cracked pavement of the motel parking lot. Andy's words played over and over in my head, each one fueling the fire in my chest. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about dignity, mine. They'd taken that from me, and I was determined to get it back. By the time I went back inside, my mind was made up. The divorce was happening, no question, but this wasn't going to be a quiet fade into obscurity for Lila and Andy. If they wanted to play games, I'd make sure they understood the cost of crossing me. The next morning, I called Victoria again. Jake, she greeted. What's the latest? I want to push the divorce through as quickly as possible, I said, but I also want to make sure she doesn't get a single thing more than she's entitled to. Victoria didn't hesitate. Understood. We'll keep it clean, but firm. Do you think she'll contest it? I thought about Lila, about her entitlement, and her need to always come out on top. Probably, but I don't care. Do whatever you need to make sure this ends on my terms. Will do, she said, her tone confident. And Jake? Don't let them rattle you. You've got the upper hand here. I hung up, a small sense of satisfaction settling over me. The storm wasn't over, but I wasn't standing in the rain anymore. I was building the shelter. Lila didn't waste any time escalating things. Barely 2 days after I sent her that text about her belongings, she called me, her voice dripping with faux concern. Jake, can we talk? She began, as though the last conversation hadn't ended with me walking out the door. Unless it's about the divorce, I'm not interested, I replied flatly. She sighed dramatically, the sound familiar and infuriating. Jake, I'm serious. I think we should try to work this out. What happened with Andy, it was a mistake. A lapse in judgment. I didn't mean for things to go this far. A mistake. That word again. As if tripping into bed with someone repeatedly over the course of months was the same as forgetting to pick up milk at the store. You mean the mistake I have screenshots of? I said, letting the weight of my words sink in. She hesitated, her tone shifting from conciliatory to defensive in an instant. You had no right to go through my phone, and you had no right to betray me. I shot back. What's your point? Lila was silent for a moment, but I could hear her breathing, shallow and agitated. Then came the pivot. Jake, think about what this divorce will do to us, our finances, our friends. Do you really want to throw everything away over one stupid mistake? I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. You already threw it away, Lila. I'm just taking out the trash. She muttered something under her breath, probably cursing me, but I didn't care. I'm done talking to you about this, I said firmly. You'll hear from my lawyer. I hung up before she could respond, tossing the phone onto the couch and pacing the room to shake off the conversation. It was the same script she always used, deflect, downplay, manipulate. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. Later that day, Victoria called with an update. "I've filed the preliminary paperwork," she said. "Lila will be served within the next 2 days. Based on what you've told me, I don't expect her to take it well." "Let her throw a tantrum," I replied. "I'm ready for whatever she tries." And I thought I was ready. But Lila had other plans. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of texts from friends. Apparently, Lila had decided to get ahead of the narrative. She'd posted a long, tearful message on social media, complete with a black and white photo of herself looking forlorn in the living room I had paid for. Lila's post. "I never thought I'd be sharing this publicly, but Jake has filed for divorce. Our marriage has been struggling for years, and I made a mistake I deeply regret. I've tried to reach out to him to make amends, but he won't even listen. I just hope he knows how much I still care for him and how sorry I am for the pain I've caused. Please respect our privacy during this difficult time." Respect our privacy? She just plastered our dirty laundry all over the internet. And that bit about trying to make amends? That was rich, considering she'd spent the last few months sneaking around with Andy like a horny teenager. My phone buzzed again. "Marcus. Dude, have you seen Lila's post? She's trying to spin this like you're the bad guy." "I saw it," I replied, my voice tight. "You want me to say something?" he asked, the anger in his tone barely contained. "No," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let her have her pity party. People will see through it eventually." But the truth was, I wasn't sure they would. Lila was good at playing the victim, and I knew she'd already started whispering her version of events to anyone who would listen. By the time the papers were officially served, the social fallout was in full swing. Mutual friends started calling and texting, some expressing sympathy, others fishing for gossip. One of her closest friends, Kara, even had the nerve to message me directly. "Kara, Jake, I heard what happened. I just want you to know that Lila's really hurting. She made a mistake, but she still loves you. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive her?" I didn't respond. There was no point. People like Kara would always see Lila as the sparkling, charismatic woman they'd grown to admire. They didn't know the Lila I'd come to know, the one who lied effortlessly and used people like stepping stones. But not everyone was on her side. Marcus, bless him, started setting the record straight in private conversations. He didn't go nuclear, but he let people know that there was more to the story than Lila's tear-streaked selfie suggested. Olivia, another mutual friend, sent me a message too. "Olivia, Jake, just so you know, not everyone's buying Lila's act. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." It was a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. That evening, I sat down with my phone, scrolling through the comments on Lila's post. Most were the standard, "Stay strong," and "You're so brave," fair, but a few stood out. Comment from Marcus, "Brave? Cheating on your husband isn't brave." It had 24 likes. Comment from Olivia, "Funny how your version of events leaves out what you were doing with Andy while Jake was working to support you." I smirked at that one. Lila had replied, of course, doubling down on her excuses, but the cracks in her facade were starting to show. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By the time Lila's divorce papers were officially served, her social media pity campaign had hit its peak. Every time I opened my phone, there was another reminder of the narrative she was weaving. More sad pictures. More cryptic captions about regret and second chances. But her posts were also starting to attract questions she clearly didn't want to answer. Comment from Jessica M. "Lila, I'm so sorry to hear this, but what's this about Andy? People are saying there's more to the story." Reply from Lila, "I don't want to discuss details publicly. This is a private matter." Reply from Jessica M. "Funny, since you're the one who made it public." I almost laughed when I saw that exchange. Marcus had been right. People were starting to see through her act. I spent the next few days focusing on my own plans. Victoria assured me that things were progressing smoothly on the legal front. The evidence I'd provided, the texts, the messages, even her social media posts, painted a clear picture of her infidelity and her attempts to manipulate the narrative. "She'll contest, but it won't hold up," Victoria said during our latest call. "Judges don't look kindly on this kind of behavior. Just stick to your guns." I was prepared to do just that. The fallout wasn't just limited to social media. Words spread among our mutual friends, and the cracks in Lila's carefully curated image widened. Olivia, who'd remained neutral until now, reached out again, this time with a story I hadn't expected. "Jake, you won't believe what I heard at Kara's dinner party last night," she began, her voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "Lay it on me," I said, already bracing myself. "Lila showed up with Andy," she said, pausing to let the weight of her words sink in. "Not even 2 weeks after the papers were filed, and she's parading him around like he's her new boyfriend." I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening around the phone. Unbelievable. "Oh, it gets better," Olivia continued. "She told everyone that the two of you had been drifting apart for years and that Andy was just there for her during a rough time. She's making it sound like you were practically separated before she got with him." I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course she is. Gotta make herself look good, right?" "Marcus shut her down, though," Olivia added, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "He straight up called her a liar in front of everyone, said you'd been blindsided and that she'd been sneaking around for months." I couldn't help but smile at that. Remind me to buy Marcus a drink. The real tipping point came a few days later when one of Lila's posts went viral for all the wrong reasons. It was a video, a teary-eyed, dramatic monologue about how sometimes people make mistakes and how she wished Jake could see how much she still cared. At first, the comments were the usual flood of sympathy and encouragement. But then someone reposted it with the caption, "Mistakes like cheating for months and blaming your husband?" That post blew up, and suddenly the tide started to turn. People began digging through her timeline, piecing together the inconsistencies in her story. Screenshots of her text with Andy, courtesy of me and Marcus, began circulating online. Lila's carefully constructed facade crumbled in real time. Comment from Aaron L. "Girl, we were rooting for you until the Andy text came out. Yikes." Reply from Lila, "You don't know the full story." Reply from Aaron L. "Then tell it." "Oh, wait, you can't." Watching it all unfold was strangely cathartic. For so long, Lila had controlled the narrative, manipulating people into seeing her as the victim. But now, the truth was out there, and there was no putting the genie back in the bottle. Even with the public backlash mounting, Lila tried one last-ditch effort to regain control. She called me, her tone frantic and desperate. "Jake, you need to stop this," she said the moment I answered. "Stop what?" I replied, feigning ignorance. "All these lies being spread about me online. You know they're not true," she insisted. "Actually, they are," I said, my voice calm. "And you brought it on yourself. Maybe next time, think twice before cheating and lying." "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. "I made a mistake, okay? I was lonely and I—" "Lila, stop," I interrupted, cutting her off. "This isn't about loneliness. This is about you thinking you could have your cake and eat it too. Now, you're just mad because people see who you really are." She was silent for a long moment, and for a brief second, I thought she might apologize. But instead, she said, "I hope you're happy, Jake. You've ruined my life." I hung up without responding. That night, I sat on the motel bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. Lila had tried to destroy me, but in the end, she'd only exposed herself. The storm wasn't over, but the winds were finally blowing in my favor. Once Lila's social media campaign imploded, she mostly went quiet. I figured she was licking her wounds, trying to figure out her next move. That suited me just fine. I had enough to focus on with the divorce proceedings and the new chapter of my life that I was trying to build. But Andy? Andy wasn't the type to fade quietly into the background. About a week after the viral fallout, I got a call from Marcus. "Jake, you're not gonna believe this," he said, his voice tinged with both disbelief and humor. "Try me," I replied. "I just heard from a buddy of mine. Andy's losing his job." That got my attention. "What?" Apparently, his boss caught wind of the whole affair drama. Turns out they're pretty big on integrity at his company, and, well, screwing around with a married woman doesn't exactly scream trustworthy. I couldn't help the grin that spread across my face. Karma's a beautiful thing. It gets better, Marcus continued. Lila was supposed to be joining him on some corporate networking event this weekend. Now that he's out of a job, they're both off the guest list. That news was the cherry on top. Lila had staked her future on Andy, thinking he was her golden ticket to the good life. Now, that ticket had just been revoked. With Andy's life unraveling and Lila's reputation in tatters, I finally felt like the scales were tipping back in my favor. But there was one last piece of revenge I hadn't decided how to play yet: the house. I'd intentionally left the property out of the early divorce filings, letting Lila believe she'd keep it by default. I didn't need the house. I didn't even want it. But knowing how much she valued the status it gave her made it a tempting lever to pull. Victoria and I discussed the matter during our next meeting. "You could push for the house," she said, her expression shrewd. "Given her infidelity, you'd have a strong case for retaining ownership. But is that what you really want?" I thought about it for a long moment. The house wasn't just a symbol of our marriage. It was the stage where Lila had carried out her betrayal. Part of me wanted to take it just to spite her, but another part of me wanted nothing to do with it. "I don't want the house," I said finally, "but I don't want her to have it either. Let's sell it and split the proceeds." "I'm not giving her a free ride." Victoria nodded. "Fair enough. I'll draft the request and add it to the filings. She won't be happy, but that's not your problem." Sure enough, Lila wasn't happy. She called me that evening, her voice a mix of anger and desperation. "Jake, you can't do this," she snapped the moment I answered. "Do what?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "The house," she practically shrieked. "You know I love that place. Why would you take that from me?" I leaned back in my chair, letting her words wash over me. "Because, Lila, you didn't earn it. I did. And frankly, I'm not interested in leaving you with anything more than you deserve." "You're being petty," she shot back. "After everything we've been through, you're really going to make this about money?" "No, you made it about money," I said coolly. "And sex. And lies. I'm just cleaning up the mess you left behind." She launched into another tirade, but I hung up mid-sentence. Her words didn't matter anymore. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork and phone calls, but things finally started falling into place. The house was listed, the divorce terms were solidifying, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was regaining control of my life. One day, Marcus invited me out for drinks to celebrate the progress. "You're finally turning the page, man," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "Not just turning it," I replied, smiling. "I'm rewriting the whole damn book." He laughed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I did too. But as much as I was moving forward, there was one thing I still couldn't let go of: closure. I didn't need an apology from Lila or Andy. I knew that would never come. What I needed was to confront the part of me that had let her take so much from me in the first place. Later that night, I sat in my motel room with a notebook and pen. I wrote down everything I wanted to leave behind: the doubts, the regrets, the anger, and then I tore the page into pieces. I wasn't just letting go of Lila. I was letting go of the version of myself that had allowed her to walk all over me. And that, more than anything else, felt like the ultimate revenge. The day the house sold was the day I felt the last tether to Lila's snap. The closing paperwork was finalized without any hiccups, and the proceeds were divided as Victoria had arranged. Lila received just enough to prevent her from screaming foul, but nothing more than what was legally hers. She didn't call me after the sale. I think she finally realized that no amount of pleading or manipulation could sway me anymore. Andy had gone radio silent, too, probably nursing his bruised ego somewhere far away from our mutual circles. I took my share of the money and found an apartment in the city. It wasn't anything flashy, but it was mine. A blank slate free of Lila's scent, her photos, her reminders. I spent my first night there sitting on the bare floor, drinking a beer, and listening to the sounds of the city. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Marcus and Olivia were instrumental in helping me settle into this new chapter. Olivia showed up with housewarming gifts: a throw blanket, a set of whiskey glasses, and a plant I'd probably kill in a week. "You're officially a bachelor now," she joked as she handed me the glasses. "Better learn to make a proper old-fashioned. Can't wait to impress all the imaginary guests." I shot back, smirking. You'll have guests eventually, Marcus chimed in, nudging me with his elbow. Trust me, man. You're not as bad a catch as Lila made you feel. It was meant as a light-hearted jab, but it landed deeper than he probably intended. Lila's betrayal had done more than shatter our marriage. It had made me question my worth. But sitting there with Marcus and Olivia, laughing and talking about the future, I realized I wasn't defined by her choices. About a month after the house sold, I finally started unpacking the emotional baggage I'd been avoiding. Therapy wasn't something I'd ever considered before, but after everything that had happened, I figured it couldn't hurt. My therapist, Dr. Reynolds, was a no-nonsense kind of guy. He didn't let me wallow, but he also didn't rush me. "What do you want out of this process?" he asked during our first session. "To move on," I replied honestly. "To stop letting what she did control me." He nodded, his pen moving quickly across the notepad. "That's a good goal. But moving on isn't about forgetting, it's about understanding. Why did you stay as long as you did? Why did you let her behavior slide? And what can you do differently moving forward?" The questions hit harder than I expected. For all the anger I directed at Lila, I hadn't spent much time examining my own role in the collapse of our marriage. "I guess I didn't want to see what was right in front of me," I admitted. "Why not?" Dr. Reynolds pressed. "Because if I admitted she was capable of doing something like this, it meant I'd wasted years of my life on a lie," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Dr. Reynolds nodded again, his expression unreadable. "It's not a waste if you learn from it." Therapy became a weekly ritual, and with each session, I felt myself shedding the bitterness that had clung to me since the day I walked in on Lila and Andy. I wasn't just healing, I was rebuilding. I threw myself into my work, taking on new projects and stepping up in ways I hadn't before. My boss noticed the change, even pulling me aside one day to say, "You've been killing it lately, Jake. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Outside of work, I started reconnecting with old friends, the ones Lila had subtly pushed out of my life over the years. It was eye-opening to see how much I'd sacrificed for her without even realizing it. One evening, Marcus convinced me to join him and Olivia for a trivia night at a local bar. I almost declined, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. "You've been hiding out long enough," he said. "It's time to remind the world you exist." I wasn't expecting much, but the night turned out to be exactly what I needed. We didn't win, but the camaraderie, the laughter, the sense of normalcy, it felt like a breath of fresh air. At one point, a woman named Claire joined our table. She was a friend of Olivia's, with bright green eyes and a sharp wit that immediately caught my attention. We spent the rest of the night swapping sarcastic comments and laughing like old friends. When the night ended, she handed me her number with a wink. "Call me if you ever want to lose at trivia again," she said. I didn't call her right away. I wasn't ready to dive back into the dating pool. But knowing that I could, that someone saw me as more than the guy who got cheated on, was a powerful step forward. By the time the divorce was finalized, I wasn't the same man Lila had tried to destroy. I was stronger, wiser, and finally free. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel.